All right, welcome back. This is the Awkward Interviews. This is actually my first one of 2022. I finished 2021 with my 25th episode. So I wasn't even sure if I was gonna continue doing this. But you know, I can't stop myself. There's so many incredible people out there who deserve as much amplification as possible, who have such smart ideas on such important topics. And my friend Afeni is one of them. I've asked her to come on multiple times, and I have a problem holding on to appointments. I'm so thankful for her patience with me. You may know her from Revolutionary Black Network, formerly known as Fred Hampton Left. She's on that channel quite a bit. But I first discovered Afeni quite a while ago as one of the people fighting with Freedom Fighters DC. I wasn't even aware of the group at the time. I've learned a lot about them since. But my other friend who I've interviewed previously for this show, Chuck Modiano, has interviewed Afeni multiple times on the streets. So for all of you Twitter warriors, for all of you who believe you're doing big things by angrily tweeting, this is an interview with someone like myself who actually does the work. And unlike myself, who's essentially retired in my old age and just likes to talk from the safety of my chair with my children around me, Afeni is doing this today. So she continues the legacy of people like me doing this in the 90s and 2000s, and obviously the much more important legacy of people before me, Malcolm X, Black Panther Party, Martin Luther King, and all of the ones that you guys haven't heard of. Afeni, thank you so much for coming on.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. For those who don't know, today is February 1st, which means it's my phone being a problem. That's always good. Today is February 1st, which means it's the beginning of Black History Month. Afeni said, you know, she wishes every Black person a happy Black History Month. I don't see why you'd wish a white person that, so that made total sense to me. And if you ask me, every month should be Black History Month. Afeni's also doing something really cool tonight at 5. So I want her to give me her extended thoughts on Black History Month, what it means, if it has meaning or if it's performative, and if it has meaning, what we can gain from doing this every year, and finally, how she's celebrating, so to speak, this evening.
Absolutely. Well, okay, so Black History Month. I'd first like to say, like, Black history is American history. Like, you really cannot separate the contribution of enslaved Black people and the contributions of free Black people from the history and the culture of this country. You just simply can't do it. So, you know, first starting off with that, I think that Black History Month is more performative than anything, but I think for Black people, just having that time to truly reflect and be, you know, really conscious of our ancestors, be really conscious of our ancestors, that could be a really moment. There's also Black August that I encourage a lot of Black people to please take part in more often, because Black August is the celebration of our freedom fighters. Black August is the uplifting of the prison movement and all of the radical movements that started in there from Black revolutionaries like George Jackson. Reflect and we honor our ancestors because we are born with their pain, we are born with their trauma, we are born with the price tag of unpaid labor and a debt that is still owed. So Black History Month is a really important time for, you know, Black people, number one, rest. Like, please rest. Like, people are doing a bunch of different, you know, I'm out here doing, but take time to intentionally rest, because I feel like, you know, Black people are constantly being valued by the work that they do or what they can produce, as all workers are, but especially Black people. We are, just really brought down to the objects that are on us and not ever in our humanhood. Respect your humanhood, and rest. That's what Black History Month means to me. And I really want all people that say they support Black people to take time to, I don't know, support reparations and do things to actually materially support Black people from here on out. Yeah. Let this be the last February that Black people don't have reparations, period.
Great answer. Yeah. So you spoke about reparations. Probably goes without saying that the organization I co-founded a couple years ago, 10 Demands, has an entire demand dedicated to reparations, as well as a public apology, which you also haven't received. And one other thing, popped into my head when you were talking about that and talking about Black History Month and the need for Black people to have a month to rest. I really love that idea. What about someone who isn't Black, particularly white people and white men and straight white men and straight Christian white men? Like these people who, those of them who want, and I say them because there's a couple qualifiers when I talk about myself, but like those all white people, how do we and this is a question you can answer for today, this month, and going out into the future. How do we actually represent ourselves the right way? To what things can we do to actually be allies today, this month, and into the future, versus saying we're allies, not saying the N-word, and being proud we have a couple Black friends?
Absolutely. Donate to bail funds, do mutual aid if you can. Lobby your local council, your city council to, if you live in a city, maybe start advocating for performance arts programs, start advocating for, different sports and community recreational programs in Black communities. Start doing stuff like that. Start advocating for real collective Black safety. And that does not mean that white people are supposed to be in the forefront or you're supposed to inject your white ideas. No. We're going to give you the script to say to your other white counterparts, and we need you to say it word for word. Okay. We don't need any additions, any subtraction, because at this point, white people, and we are all workers. White people have benefited so much from the very long history of unpaid labor people in the various forms of economic, just various forms of economic stimulation, all that and all that other stuff. So, redistribute some of your white wealth. It's a very good way to do it. I'm not saying donate, don't give, I'm not saying give money to random Black people. I mean, if you want to do that, sure. But, give money to Black feminist collectives, give money to Black, give money to Black women that do maternal care for other Black women that do at-home births. Give money to that. Give, again, like I said, I'll say it again, give money to bail funds. If there's a public defender's office around you, see what you can do to support them. Because I promise you, they're probably understaffed and overworked and probably hungry. Bring them some food. Help them free our folks. There are many different things, so many different things that you can do this month and for the rest of your life.
Beautiful. And please, everybody, listen, heed that, do it. I'm always asked, what can I do? You have the answers right there. And you mentioned, don't change the script, don't speak for us, don't take control. And I want you to be brutally honest with me. How can I do a better job? Because that's a delicate, thin line that I am always trying to be on the right side of. being active in what I'm doing, but not speaking for or over anybody. And you know, my intentions are really good, but any one of us has the potential to make mistakes. Uh-oh, may have lost Afeni. Maybe she's so offended by my question.
I don't know if
you hear me.
I would say, yeah, okay. It froze, so I was like,
Okay.
I just stopped. Okay.
She's back.
But I'm back. But ooh, I mean, honestly,
I know I'm putting you
see
on
it
the
a lot.
spot.
I mean, it's fine. I don't mind making people uncomfortable at all. Actually,
Good.
I'm very confrontational.
Make me feel bad.
But like I honestly feel like, you know, a lot of the white left, and I'm not really just talking about you in particular. I don't really think I'm talking about you when I say this, but a lot of the white left, you know, their care and compassion and their activism for Black people just simply does not go far enough. And yes, advocating reparations is great. Doing all those things is really amazing. But like, how are you decolonizing your mind? Like, how many Black authors are you reading? How many Black authors are you recommending to your white friends? You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of white leftists, especially, like, they read Marx, they read Lenin, they read Mao. But are you reading Alice Walker?
Mm-hmm.
Did you read Bell Hooks? How about Zora Neale Hurston? Like, did we discover different types of, you know, abolitionist, revolutionary, Combahee River Collective statement? Did you read that? You know, like, these are the things that I feel like white people on the left could really benefit from, because a lot of the time that I feel like we're having conversations and, you know, there's a disconnect, it's just generally because there's a level of my identity that you are just not clicking on, like you're not seeing a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And like, and that doesn't happen with me, but it happens with many other like Black activists that have conversations in the space. Like, we are constantly being told that, you know, oh, well, we're all one humankind. Like, please stop saying that. I know you mean it out of the nicest way possible. You're saying it in a way that you're like, well, I just care about all human beings because you're an anti-racist person. Okay, great. If you're truly anti-racist and you understand that that race contributes to my experience in this society, and you have to stand in solidarity with that, even if you don't fully understand it, even if it doesn't affect you. The only way that we can free everyone is to free the most oppressed and marginalized groups amongst us. And unfortunately, white leftists, a lot of that ain't y'all. You see what I'm saying? So there are a lot of things that you'll just have to, you know, support you don't get. And that's what coalition building is about. But I like, because, you know, there are white people that have not deconstructed their white ego. Because let's be very clear, like, you know, I grew up around a lot of white people. So my understanding of white people is very, very clear. That, you know, when you're being constantly told that you're the greatest, you're the best, oh my God, you're the prettiest, you're the most desirable, like anything you can do is possible, like every single part of representation that you see yourself in that. That is a lot of ego to hold. And a lot of white people hold that ego. And that's where that entitlement comes from. And that's why even in these spaces, white entitlement gets in the way of true liberation. So deconstructing your whiteness, deconstructing the white supremacists within you, I very much understand that's probably a very hard process. It's probably very hard to to really just reject all of the ancestral feeling inside of you, to just be your best white self and say, fuck everybody. Like, that does take a lot of work, but it's also to a greater means of an end. Sacrificing your whiteness and your white identity and your white privilege is the only thing that is going to get any of us free, because then and only then will we truly center race and gender in these conversations.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And, you know, I know that it's the neoliberal, like, big talking point. I don't see color. Everyone's equal. And you were right to say that they mean well. And I think a lot of people mean well in supporting reformism as well. things that look like they're helping but don't, like the George Floyd Act, which had it passed would have given 750 million more to the police. That's a reform that doesn't chip away at the system, so it's problematic. It's something that we can't support. Another thing that I thought of when you were talking about all of that is, I also, it's very clear that race is is an issue that definitely you see played out, the inequity, you see those things played out in these groups that we're a part of. But I also see that with men and women. And I also, and I shouldn't even say men and women, with all genders and sexualities, men tend to be domineering. And when I was, I don't know, 19 or 20, I was elected to be the head of an activist union, and I was called out like, you are talking over people, you are talking too much, you are making too many decisions. And that was so eye-opening for me, because I took this, like you mentioned, the ego of just being white and told, you're everything, and seeing yourself manifested in everything. Sorry about my cat. In this situation, it was a different type of ego. It was more a male ego, I think, because it was a pretty mixed race group, but it was like I had been given this title, and I didn't see that my behaviors changed. And it was really a monumental moment. From that point on, I was so careful about everything, everything I said, and not only what I said, but how I said it, my volume, my physical stature. I can be physically overwhelming, like all of those things. And the way they did it was by, straight up like taking over a meeting and saying, this is what we're feeling. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go into these group settings. We're going to flat out tell you what you've done. You're going to listen. We're going to talk about it. And it was really effective. Last thing I'll say about the last thing you were saying about, white, so-called white allies is, I just saw randomly in the news, to be honest with you, I'm not sure if it was, a Latin American woman or if it was a Black woman, or obviously a Black woman can also be Latin American. I'm not sure, but she had seen the movie Encanto with her son, and her son was standing like an inch from the TV in awe, staring at that boy, the character, and he thought it was him in the movie. He thought they had put him in the movie, and it gave me chills. It was like, it became national news because it was so rare that someone of that skin color or that background could see themselves in something mainstream.
Absolutely, and just as we can acknowledge the ways in which like all of the privileges of being white pumps up the white ego, upholds white supremacy, imagine the deficit on the other side. Like take that feeling and reverse it. Make it the opposite. And that's what we're dealing with. And that's really the thing, is that, I feel like a lot of the time people see, especially Black revolutionary, like womanist movements. I feel like I'm a Black revolutionary womanist. People see like people like us, and they are like, oh, well, you're so strong, you're so this, you're so that, and you so strong. I'm so strong that you're not addressing any of my issues. I'm so strong that you're literally actively ignoring me as I'm screaming for help. I'm so strong that every single time I show up for you, I lose a small part of the energy that I had to fight for myself, and I don't get any of that back in return when it comes down to my issues. Wow. So like our oppression always pushes us towards the solutions that will lead us into liberation. And I think that, as a Black woman, as a Black queer woman that sits at those intersections, like I really, really want us all to get to a point where we can have these uncomfortable conversations, where we can start to really freedom dream about what it looks like to be, an equitable society, whether or not that's everybody's, fucking magical rainbow vision of everybody living in perfect harmony. I just, whether or not, like, if it's not that, I think that people need to be okay with that. If Black people feel safer and not being like that, I mean, do you blame us? I mean, for real. And I feel
No.
like a lot of people aren't willing to listen to those different solutions, whether or not, those are actually where we should go. That's the point of the matter is that that's a part of the conversation that needs to be heard as well. And
Yes.
it's been completely drowned out in a lot of the conversations, especially overarching on the left, especially within the last 5 years with this whole like Bernie burnout.
Mm-hmm.
The Black left was largely ignored. Like, issues that the left could have really capitalized on were largely ignored.
Yep.
Because they were not inclusive enough to make everyone comfortable.
Yeah, and inclusive is the key word. Having a Black boy in Encanto, well, the movie is I think totally people of color, so that's more inclusive than just diversity. But to be clear, there is a distinction. You can't just fill an office with different colors. That doesn't make things equitable. It doesn't make the people who aren't white feel included and respected and heard. So those are, important distinctions that you hinted at. Another thing you said in passing, or I guess the way you referred to yourself was as a womanist, and that I'm not even sure if I've heard that term before. I mean, which is interesting. If it's in a bunch of books that I've read, then I'm not reading carefully enough. But obviously the word most people are familiar with is feminist. And you are actually doing something tonight that I mentioned earlier, I think focused on women. So can you explain what womanist means and what you're doing tonight and why that's important to you?
Yeah, so, my interpretation of womanism is truly being protective of all types of femininity, whether it is non-binary femininity, whether it is, Black men who are feminine, protecting the feminine identity of all people. I feel like a lot of the white feminist movement, number one, is not inclusive of Black issues, even all the way back in the women, in the second wave of the women's movement in the 1970s. They were literally silencing Black women when they wanted to talk about things like forced sterilizations of Black women and Puerto Rican women. They were silencing people when they were talking about, workplace sexual violence. Like, how exactly are we a part of the same movement if my issues are not important? That doesn't make any sense to me. So the reason why, I call myself a womanist and not a feminist is because a lot of also like the feminist separatism of like, oh, we don't really need men. I'm a Black person and I understand that, especially it's important for Black men to be included in our conversation, not only because, not only just cis het Black men, but Black queer men, Black non-binary, femmes that were previously, that transitioned from being man, like all of these things matter. All these people matter. So when you like say like things, it's like, we're getting into weird territory now. Like now we're still saying there's a class of people that just don't deserve like any type of, like, I don't know. And like, I don't really like that. I don't really get with that. And yeah, I feel like womanism is it's just more encompassing of who I advocate for, and many other Black queer people as well.
Cool. And before you get into what you're doing tonight, language is really important. It's not as important as my children and their generation think it is. I find it shocking that I'm on the side of thinking cancel culture has gone too far, since that whole concept came from the right. But there have been more than one occasion where people have attempted to cancel me for saying like a sentence that they didn't agree with. And so as much as I believe that that's too much, language is important, and teaching people why language is changing is important. A lot of people that I, see in my daily life outside of activism are sick of it. They don't want to hear the new terms for sexuality. They don't want to hear that it should be houseless and not homeless. But when I explain to people that people who are housing insecure or who do not have a house make a home wherever they are, it actually makes sense. So it's kind of just educating people and being patient. I think one problem we have on the left, again, it relates to cancel culture, is just jumping down everyone's throats. Like, maybe they don't know. Maybe like the way to know is to learn. And that actually brings me to another place I'd like to go with you after, where, I believe too that as an abolitionist, anyone can be transformed, which means even the people that you hate the most are not necessarily the devil and are not necessarily incapable of changing. And I want to talk about that, before we go. But please tell me about tonight, because I am going to publish this today, and I just want, if anyone else hears about it from this, great.
Yeah, so I will be running a session for the University of District of Columbia, UDC. It's an HBCU out here in DC, and I will be on. I'll just be talking about Black womanism. I'll be talking about also Afrofuturism, the idea that Black will exist in the future. That's complex, but yeah. So I'll be touching on Afrofuturism because Black people cannot exist in the future if Black women don't, period.
Yeah.
So really just talking about like the history of the erasure of Black women in social movements. And since we are in such a unique political moment where we are so close to revolution, we are so close to, the end of this empire, it's very important to start to have the very formative conversations about what liberation looks like for all of us, but especially for Black women. So yeah,
That sounds awesome. Why are you so certain? Why are you so certain we're close? Why now? What is different now?
I just think that whether or not people want to acknowledge it, like all of the things that are happening right now are not happening on accident. Like there are so many things that are working in tandem to create the energy that is happening right now, spiritually, physically, legislatively. And people are feeling that. Because we are earthly beings, but we're also spiritual beings, whether or not you believe in, God or whatever. Like something animates all of this and we're all connected for a reason. So if we are feeling collective pain, we're feeling collective suffering. And also, just the real material things, like 15 million people got kicked off their health insurance in 2020. And a lot of those people are still not employed. And if they are employed, they're underemployed. So they probably don't have health insurance. You have all the people that are either facing eviction, have already been evicted, or, that are, like you said, unhoused or underhoused. That number is growing daily. Kids are food insecure in the richest country in the world. There are kids that literally do not have enough food to eat. The school system in my local neighborhood is breaking down. I don't know what it's doing around y'all neighborhood, but teachers are quitting.
Yeah, it's not good.
There's literally not enough food for kids to eat for lunch. There are not enough school bus drivers to take kids to school. And teachers are getting sick at alarming rates. Kids are getting sick at alarming rates. So people feel all of this. People feel all of these things. They can see all of these things. They can see our government being completely ineffectual to their everyday lives.
Right.
And people are getting frustrated. And the world's about to end because climate change is going to kill us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
that's true. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'll take that. We don't have that much time. There's also we had the longest period of sustained protest in our nation's history. It feels to me like I'm seeing more and more mutual aid collectives starting up across the country. I'm seeing a lot more people calling themselves abolitionist and talking about abolitionist principles. Thanks to Colin Kaepernick, it's like entered the mainstream. And at the same time, though, I'm seeing more Nazis, more white supremacists, more white nationalists than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I'm seeing laws being passed that are actively fighting back against all of the work that we're doing, which, you take those two things in addition to what you were saying, and I think it almost pushes us further. Those things aren't stopping us from fighting. They're only pushing us harder. And you mentioned earlier on that, we could fight for some, I don't know, you didn't use this word, but utopia or whatever. And it made me think about something Alec Karakatsanis said when I interviewed him. He's a really effective lawyer, civil rights lawyer. And, what he said was, what we have now, which all abolitionists say, doesn't work. It doesn't keep us safe. Why would you think that any alternative to what we have now would create perfection? We're human beings. Perfect isn't possible, but what we're talking about is far better, right? And so, don't say because it's imperfect, it's impossible. No, it's possible because it's imperfect. And another thing that my friend Dylan Rodriguez said, he's one of the founding members of Critical Resistance, an author and professor. And when I interviewed him, he also mentioned that, and I think this again is just language and semantics almost, but you're talking about a place where Black people are liberated and where we as a society are more liberated because, none of us are free as long as one person is not. And I agree with that. But what Dylan said was abolition is not, for one, it's not a trademark. It's also not an end goal. It's a way of living. It's a way of being. And it started well before us and it will continue way after us. It's just this ongoing fight for liberation that will never end. I'm curious what you think about those two comments from other great folks, and your take on abolition as a whole. Would you consider yourself abolitionist, and what does it mean to you?
Absolutely. So, I think that it's very important to realize that abolition is not impossible, but it is unimaginable. And it can only come from true and honest communication about what the harms are. If we do not actually name the problem, how the hell do we solve it? And I feel like, a lot of people, because they can't see the full vision of what abolition looks like they don't want to support it, and it's because they're scared. I'm of the belief that most people can be transformed. There's always going to be there's always going to be people that have mental health issues, whether they're to themselves or to others, but those are going to be a very small percentage of people. It is not anywhere near the amount of people that are incarcerated in this country or globally. Nowhere near that amount. So anything outside of, genuine care, a genuine care and compassion, anything outside of an institution that, is instilling humanity inside of you, at even if you do have to live there for your own protection or whatever, you're just a political prisoner, because every other law at this point is just politics. All of these people that make these laws break the same fucking laws every day, but yet they are not incarcerated. They are not we do not see them as morally deficient. These are choices that these people make because they want to survive. Their class wants to survive. So how can we not fundamentally understand that on our level, where the survival is so much more dire, really? The level of what we need to survive at this level as working class people is so much more. So when we think about abolition, we're not only thinking about, okay, we need to abolish all prisons and we need to abolish all the prisons and police and everything just needs to go into anarchy. No, we are building the plane as we fly it. As we are you know, destroying the financial power structure of this country by withholding our financial labor. We are doing mutual aid. We are building better systems. We are having those conversations. A lot of these things before us, as was previously said, a lot of these systems existed before us. So there are ways to have these conversations and be imaginative, because a lot of the work is already done. We just have to go out and seek that information. We just have to go out and seek that theory and start to have those conversations and start to put those theories into action. Yep. We know that if we withhold our labor, it will disrupt the financial power structure of this country. We know that. So let's organize towards that. That's the solution. So what are all of the little steps in between that? Well, most of those things are already laid out. Do they need to be adapted to a modern time? Absolutely, they do. But as an abolitionist, because I do identify as an abolitionist, like, it's so important to acknowledge that while we may not have the full picture right now, we have a good portion of it, of what it looks like in a society that is not built around just pure violence, isn't just built around financial dominance, that isn't built around racial dominance. There are plenty of countries, plenty of governments all over the world that do not do that. Do we get to hear about those countries and governments? No, because they're the most propagandized country in the world. But a part of abolition is awakening people to that truth. And, you know, I don't remember who said this, but I heard Bell Hooks say it the other day when I was watching this talk that she had. But, you know, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off.
Yeah. Bell Hooks was.
So you have to have that radical anger. We have to have that radical love and respect for ourselves enough to know that we have to do whatever is necessary in order to get free. Period. Period.
Yeah. So what do
you go ahead.
Sorry. What do you say to those who are most heavily impacted by the violence in our society, by mass criminalization, who haven't gotten there yet?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question? You broke up.
Sure. What do you say to, for instance, like, you know, a Black woman in your neighborhood who still thinks that the solution to the violence she sees in her neighborhood is more cops?
You know, a lot of those people in my neighborhood are older grandmothers. Right. Their sons are on the police force or whatever. And they see, like, they've only ever seen authoritative, violent, you know, like military style occupying forces in neighborhoods. And a lot of that comes from the indoctrination of being a Black American in the society. A lot of, I mean, like, you know, James Baldwin even wrote about this in White Guilt, that there's a certain percentage of Black people that really do think that, you know, this is just how things are supposed to be. And in order to, you know, dispel that, number one, there are a certain amount of people that are just they're not going to believe it till they see it. And people that are fearful of government assistance should be. Because at the end of it, every single time the government has given any assistance, especially to Black women, like, you know, welfare, for example, Black women were getting welfare, they're benefiting from it, they were building their, you know, their wealth and their financial stability. And then we got demonized for it. We got called welfare queens and all this other stuff because one woman decided to do fraud. One Black woman did fraud on, you know, stamps, and then all of us have we want to give you some free medical care. You know, they didn't believe that shit either. You know, like, because at the end of the day, like, I mean, they believed it then, but now because of like the results of that, they're not going to believe that the things that we are saying are coming from a place that is not influenced by an ulterior motive. And there are just, and I feel like, you know, I think that we have to get very comfortable with the fact as abolitionists that it's going to take a principled, like a principled mass, a critical mass amount of people that truly believe that there is a better path forward and are working to build that better path. And there are going to be people that won't believe it till they see it.
Yeah.
You know?
And so
there
I
were plenty
guess
of slaves.
we're doing the right thing then, because every day I see a new person is like, one thing I've actually, side note, one thing I've been doing a lot of lately is communicating directly with and to people who are like Biden folks who call themselves Democrats proudly and use the term liberal proudly, because they, again, are these types that are well-intentioned and don't read into the bills that they're supporting. And the more that I feed them abolitionist material, the more radical they're becoming. And I'm seeing more and more of them calling themselves abolitionists. And so I guess like that's one contribution that anyone can really make. Like you mentioned, how many Black authors have you introduced your white friends to?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we got a few minutes left. What do you say to the Black man or woman who isn't just, and by the way, what you said about indoctrination, that was real. I mean, like that helped me understand a great deal. And actually, as a white guy, I mean, as a Jew, I don't go to a Black man or woman and say, your belief is wrong. I can't say that. I shouldn't say that. And yet I disagree with them, right? Which, so I'm not going to ask you for advice on how I should have that conversation. That's not your job. But I do want to ask you what you might say to someone who's not just not yet there, but who is so far not there that he's siding or she's siding with white supremacists, who has totally bought into the Black Lives Matter and Antifa are criminals and terrorists. How they exist. And I was just on the show of one very popular one, who for the first time in my life, I had to walk out of the interview. I mean, he's a Nazi sympathizer, and he's a Black man, and he kept saying things like, I'm a simple Black man, or I'm a stupid Black man, or oh no, he said I'm a slow Black man. He's like insulting his very being as he's asking me these questions designed to piss me off, and it worked. But he's a Black man, so I couldn't sit there and say XYZ. I said, man, as a Black man, you should be against white supremacy. And then I left, because what more can I say? So what would you say?
I mean, like I said, like I was about to say, like there are a certain amount of people that are okay with, slavery as long as they can benefit from it. As long there are a certain amount of Black people that are okay with racism as long as they can benefit from it. And unfortunate, I mean, shit, that's just how it is. Like I don't know what else to say. Like that's just how it is. Like there's been so much, division within Black people, not only by sexuality, by gender, by religious affiliation. Like there are so many different reasons why Black people go into the directions that they go to, because the Black experience is not monolithic. Your financial and socioeconomic background will very heavily influence your politics, most likely. So I mean, I'm not an authoritarian. You see what I'm saying? Like I don't believe that everyone has to believe the same things that I believe, even within my own community. As much as it pisses me off, as much as I would love for everybody to, not be ignorant as hell, there are some people that are okay with ignorance because they benefit from it, even if they are a Black person, even if it inherently harms them, even if it inherently harms me, even if it inherently harms their cousins, their brothers, whoever. They don't care, because at the end of the day, they don't see themselves as a full human being. So why the hell would they love themselves enough to fight for themselves and the humanity of other Black people? Damn. They don't see us as human beings, because we have not been seen in this country as human beings for the entire time that we've been here. We're not, y'all, like, we keep saying that, oh, for 400 years, we are still being dehumanized to this day.
Yes. Look at, I mean, yeah, look at prison labor. People don't understand. You can't get rid of private prisons and call that a solution. I mean, this is one of a million examples of the way Black people are still oppressed today, but just looking at, you know, the percentage, the ratio of Black people in prison, 1 in 3 Black boys end up there, and they're working for 0 to 10 cents an hour, making products that, like a hand sanitizer that we're using during COVID on the outside. And it's a travesty of justice. Okay. Last question. You mentioned you're not authoritarian, nor am I. How do we extrapolate then as that, you know, as it relates to, I don't know, January 6th or yesterday in Florida or the day before in Florida when Nazis were there waving their flags? Freedom of speech, right?
So, I mean, I'm a free speech absolutist. Like I've said this before, like I'm a fuck around and find out free speech absolutist. Say whatever the fuck you want, but you might have to deal with the natural consequences of your words and your actions. Like, this is a white supremacist country. White supremacy, just because it, like, for white people, the hoods have returned. So it's more like, oh my God, like the Nazis are back. The KKK is back. The KKK has always been here. Okay, y'all. Before they were in suits and they had advanced degrees. They still have suits and they still have advanced degrees and they're still in positions of power. So, like, I don't really necessarily have an issue with people spewing hate speech. If you hate me for being Black, I mean, that's between you and yours.
And actually,
you and yours. But if your hatred seeps into my life in a systematic way because your race of people is the powerful one, then, you know, that hits a little different. So I'm not even necessarily worried about, like, I do worry about the words only because they reinforce the action and the system that they come from. And the attitudes that they come from. But as far as thinking that January 6th was some, like, you know, big terrorist attack or whatever, I do not think that. I'm sorry, I will never think that. There was a real insurrection in 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina, where they killed Black legislators and over 300 Black civilians, and replaced all of those legislators with white people and with white men specifically. Yeah,
that's what it looks like. I hear you. Okay. So, yeah, Martin Luther King said, it's not these Nazis we have to worry about. It's the neoliberals we think are our friends. The Nazis on the streets, we know exactly who they are. We don't have to worry because they're not hiding from us and we know what they believe. The real poignant point is that when these beliefs influence legislation, policing, everything else, it becomes a serious issue. And that's what and you know, you and other people of color, Black women, are facing today. And, you know, I think you're absolutely right. Like, people who are racist and don't know it in their everyday thinking, in their everyday actions, are horrified at the swastika and the white hood. But to your points, A, they've always been here. They just feel a little more empowered now. And B, you know, that it's not as insidious, actually, as the everyday racism that influences all of our decisions that we're not even aware of. And so my final question then is, when you were a part of Revolutionary Black Network, at least, you and others, my friend Nick, who co-founded 10 Demands with me, you guys have been the target of supposed allies many, many times, as have I, for being friends with you guys, or for the crazy notion that I want to focus on the institution of policing over hyper individualizing specific cases of police brutality. These allies are often labeling as Antifa, anti-fascist, but really anti-Nazi, anti-racist in a way, but like not but not necessarily against authoritarianism, because they're coming down on us in a very authoritative way. It's one thing to call me whatever the hell you want. It's another thing to call Black people, powerful Black, young Black leaders, Nazis, Nazi sympathizers. Let's just close this with your response to these people.
I'm sorry. The last, like the last bit of your question broke off. What was the question?
The question is, what's your response to people who have the audacity to call powerful young Black men and women Nazis or Nazi sympathizers because you're free speech absolutists, because you are willing to work with people you disagree with, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, so for me personally, like anti-racism is that's like a non-negotiable. If we're in community together, or if I'm organizing with you, you have to be anti-racist. Like, because as a Black woman, like me personally, I don't subject myself to undue trauma if I don't have to. But are there like conservatives that I would work? Are there conservatives that I would and have worked with and have had conversations with? Absolutely. When the Proud Boys came out here in December, 95% of the time we was cussing them out. But there were some times where I was just like, bro, let me just ask you a question, like, why are you okay with not having healthcare? Why are you okay with your wages not going up? Why are you okay with all these different things? Like having like the real like socialist, like, do you not understand what we're advocating for? Like, are you confused? And then they're like, oh, like, yeah, we're just trying to make your and your kids' lives better. And so some of them get it, but it doesn't make them any less racist. It doesn't make them any less hateful. So, in my experience, like, because I am not fazed by hate speech, I grew up around a bunch of racist ass white people. Like, I've been called all different types of things. So it's just like, those things do hurt and they do cause a lot of trauma, and it does take a while to unpack all of that. But the racism that I am truly and honestly worried about is a racism that is baked into the society that affects my everyday life, health, my probability of having children. Like, all of those things are the things that I feel like people, especially people that say they're on our side, should be focusing on. Like the cultural issues of, red team versus blue team, or like civil rights. Like, civil rights is cool, I guess, but if it doesn't challenge the financial power of this country, then what the fuck are we talking about? If it doesn't talk about dismantling the war power of this country, then what are we talking about? If we're not talking about dismantling the system that brought us in mass incarceration, then what are we talking about? If we're not talking about amending the 13th Amendment to completely outlaw slavery and actually abolish it, then what are we talking about, y'all? Because I can tell y'all, voting rights legislation don't mean shit in a white supremacist country that don't let everybody vote anyway. Like, oh my God, we got voting rights. And guess what? 60 years later, we're still chanting and fucking screaming about the same shit. So while you're worried about Nazis saying the N-word, and while you're worried about anti-Semitism like being spread on like through social media, through words, real violence is happening out here. Real violence is happening materially and legislatively that we can very much combat, to dismantle the systems that fuel these attitudes and the violence that come behind them. If you want to stop anti-Semitism, then I don't know, let's dismantle the violent system that perpetuates it. You want to stop racism? Dismantle the racist system that perpetuates it. You want to stop sexism? Dismantle the racist system that perpetuates it. That's it. Anything short of that is all bullshit. And I really don't care what people who don't actually want to get to real solutions have to say about me, or what they say about my politics, or who I choose to be bothered by, because I'm far more bothered by y'all, to be honest.
Boom. Conversation over. You killed it. I knew you would. Thank you so much, Afeni. This has been an absolute pleasure. One of my favorites, if not the most. Good luck tonight. Keep doing what you're doing. You're a hero. I love you, and I'll talk to you soon.